Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I hope you are doing well and enjoying all the new episodes we've been dropping. I am a little extra happy today because Aham Yoga, my yoga studio, just turned 10. I cannot believe that we've been at it for a decade. We have the most wonderful yoga community that has stood by us from day one. I don't know where time has gone. And all I remember today, just before starting to record this for you, I was reflecting on how it all started. And I have such strong and even fond memories of how scared I used to be and like really scared of everything. I had just moved from India. I did not know how to drive, for starters, right? If I got a job to teach at the YMCA, I didn't know how to drive. And I was learning to drive. I was learning to live in a new country, leave alone trying to figure out how to run a yoga shala and a yoga studio and things like that. But I don't know if you know, but Yoga kind of started in reverse. Most yoga studios, they lease a space, they set up the studio, they put out a schedule, they market it, and then customers walk in. We did it in reverse. We used to rent a little space where we are still today, okay? And we used to run one class on a Saturday morning. And that one class slowly snowballed into more classes and then more classes and then workshops and trainings. The community kind of dictated where we went. And as people asked for more, we slowly stacked on more. So from weekends, we came to weeknights. From weeknights, we came to midday. And we slowly went where the community was asking for us to add more yoga practice. So it's literally the opposite of what you see in the mainstream yoga world. It's taken a lot of work. It's taken a lot of courage. And I've had the privilege of meeting some of the most wonderful people of my lifetime in and at Aham Yoga. So why am I telling you this, right? Because Aham Yoga started with one or two students. Okay. And today we have thankfully grown and we've been able to share the little yoga we know with thousands and thousands of students. Okay. Many of whom were beginners. Okay. My yoga studio has a largely Indian immigrant population and most of them didn't go to other yoga studios. And so they were beginners, right? Most of my students, at least 60 to 70% of people at Aham Yoga were beginners to yoga who never really did a lot of asana, right? So what I needed to do over the years is if I wanted them to fall in love with yoga, I had to figure out how to handhold them from the stage they were in, from not knowing anything or knowing very little asana practice, and slowly growing them, making them feel successful in asana, and also relating them to other aspects of yoga and deeper aspects of yoga. So I have been testing, trying, failing many times, and coming up with a blueprint that now we put on repeat at Aham Yoga that helps us to move the student in a way where they relate to yoga and they feel successful and they come back to continue investing in themselves and in their journey with yoga. So the reason I'm telling you this is because my Teaching Yoga to Beginners course has just launched. And this is 10 years of being in classes. And I've literally been in classes for 10 years, almost every day, chipping away at this. And I have taken all my learnings and I have made all the mistakes so you don't have to. And I have condensed and packed it into a 30-hour online course that is built specifically for you because I feel like yoga teachers do not get enough time in understanding how to work with a beginner. Most yoga teacher trainings, if I'm being very honest with you, and I've always been very honest with you about how teacher trainings work, is they already teach you to teach asana to somebody who knows what to do. It is so easy to teach yoga to someone who already knows what is down dog and what is tree pose and things like that. It is much harder to sit in a room full of people, all of whom are very different. You don't know who will walk in and figure out how to make what you do relatable and it should make them succeed. Okay. So it's not possible in a 200-hour teacher training because there is just so much that is going on there. What we need is specific focus where we zoom in on beginners and build from there. Okay. I've always said the foundation matters for you as a teacher, for the student, because everything you build on will depend on how strong and solid your foundation is. So I have taken 10 years of my work and packed it into this teaching yoga to beginners. There isn't a course like this out there. Okay, you can look. It is something that a lot of yoga teachers will jump over because teaching beginners is a challenging experience, right? But I would say it is the most rewarding. When you see your beginners have the smallest wins, their eyes light up. There is so much joy when they share it with you. And I really hope you can have more of these kind of experiences in future. The training starts on November 7th. So that's literally less than 4 weeks from when you're listening to this. Okay. It is a combination of a few different things. Firstly, it's completely online. It is built for yoga teachers who want to get better at teaching, especially a beginner. And honestly, between you and me, the blueprint I share in this, you can apply to any class. Okay. So even if you don't teach beginners, it will definitely up your game in making your classes more adaptable and more engaging to all practitioners. But it's completely online. The course has a few live sessions where you and I are in a Zoom room working together. The course has a very structured, detailed, pre-recorded content library. So you go topic by topic and they're all short and concise. Okay. How you learn matters to me. So I've done my best to make it as effective as possible. And then there is a manual. There is a checklist that will keep you on track. There is sample class plans and sequences. Okay. There will be reflective homework for you to do. And then there are alumni sessions on the other end. So it's not like once this course is done, I'm like, okay, thank you, bye-bye, good to know you. We'll get back into the room every 6 months and we'll check in with each other. And what I want you to know is enrollments for this open October 15th. Okay. If you're somebody who knows you're going to do this course, then go for it. But October 16th, I'm hosting an information session. It's at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. Okay. And I want you to come for that because I will give you a preview of the content, walk you through the content library. We'll talk about how the course is laid out because I feel like I believe in transparency. Okay. And I want you to know all that you will get because I am so proud of how structured this course is. And it has helped so many yoga teachers. And I want you to come ask your questions. Let's meet. Let me get to know your yoga journey, your goals a little more. And then you can enroll if you're interested. Even if you're not interested, show up. Okay. I want you to start understanding what high quality yoga education should look like. Okay. Because you're going to be investing your time, money, and effort, and even your yoga dreams into it. Okay. So October 16th, 8:30 a.m. Pacific time is the information session. October 15th, enrollment's open. You can totally sign up and then come to the information session. If you can't attend live, make sure you get waitlisted for it. I will send out the replay the same day. The course itself starts on November 7th. So I hope you are marking those dates. Maybe pause this podcast, put those dates down. You can sign up for the waitlist, as I call it, by going to ahamyoga.com. Just navigate to the teacher training segment and go to the beginners yoga teacher training page. You can click on the link in the podcast description that will take you to it. Okay. You can also go to my Instagram handle. It's everywhere. Okay. But please make sure you take a moment to just pause and reflect on how you have been trained when it comes to teaching students, right? It is so easy in modern day. And if I could go on a little rant as a yoga studio owner, in modern day, what do? We have a new student special that most yoga studios put up. And the student comes in and they literally buy that special and navigate themselves. And they bump from one class to another, trying to figure it out. And while this approach may work for somebody who's able-bodied and athletic and who is looking at yoga as a workout, a lot of people they find this very confusing, right? They go into a class and suddenly they realize that they're unable to keep up. And they're in a room full of people who have actually been doing yoga for a very long time. And it's very impersonal. Okay. And a lot of students just leave disheartened and say, you know what, yoga is not for me. Okay. So to me, it really, as a studio owner, it really bothers me when we expect students to navigate. Then what are we there for? Right. So I believe in funneling people through beginners courses and then moving them into other parts of practice, setting a very, very strong foundation. Okay. So essentially, what am I saying? Take my 10 years of work. Okay. It's 30 hours of your time. and it will change how you show up in your classes. There is nothing more satisfying than making your student succeed, because when your student succeeds, you succeed. Okay. So remember, the dates you have to put down are November 7th. That's when the course launches. I will see you in a Zoom room on October 16th, 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. Go get waitlisted. Enrollments open on the same day. Okay. So that's about it for this very long intro. I really want you to remember that it's harder to get into a yoga studio and compete with 25 other teachers and try to find your own little community and make an impact. It is so much more satisfying when you have a smaller group of people who know nothing about yoga and you build that up for them. I have done it for the past decade, and I have really worked on building that blueprint. And I want to share that blueprint with you in my Teaching Yoga to Beginners course. So that's my intro for today. I'm sharing a snippet of something that is from the training. These are 3 sequencing principles that I use often in classes. You will learn the course is way more in depth. What you hear today is a preview, 3 sequencing principles that I often use in classes. The course goes way more in depth, but I'm sure that even if you don't do the course, you will have value from these 3 sequencing principles that I am sharing. Give it a listen. There is so much there. And I hope to see you on November 7th in the Teaching Yoga to Beginners course. Enjoy this episode. And I hope to see you in the Teaching Yoga to Beginners info session and maybe even the course. Enjoy this episode. I'll see you on the other side.
Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. I personally think as a yoga teacher, an asana teacher, it's my moral responsibility to showcase the best of yoga to the student, no matter what stage of practice they're in. Okay. But most beginners today will start off with asana or the physical practice of yoga. And it's probably how many of you started too, right? So as yoga teachers, we should be aiming to transform a beginner student into a lifelong practitioner of yoga. Okay. And perhaps even a lifelong student of yours. And if you can just really for a moment let that sink in, that is tremendous. And that is what really has moved the needle for me. Just the thought of taking a beginner student and having them walk through different phases of yoga with me is how I have invested and reinvested in Aham Yoga over the years. A good approach would be to make sure your asana classes are really high quality, they're thorough, they're relatable. While there are many aspects to teaching beginners, which we'll explore in depth in the course, in today's episode, I want to focus on sequencing principle for beginners. So sequencing principles largely being asana related. I'm going to give you 3 out of my 9 sequencing principles that I have used for beginners asana classes for a decade, and they absolutely work. Okay. So get your notes app open or grab your book and pen and paper, because this is valuable. Okay. A lot of times we overthink a lot of these things. So just getting clarity on some of these everyday occurrences in yoga, right? Teaching beginners is very important. So sequencing principle number 1 is lay the roadmap. Sequencing principle, the first one, is lay the roadmap. You need to start by drawing out your roadmap. Essentially, this is you charting your course. In the actual training, we'll talk about building a fundamental bank of asana, and other practices which every yoga teacher should have ready and can be used in any circumstances for anyone. But more of that in the training, because I won't be able to go into in depth in this episode. Okay. But to lay the roadmap, I'm going to give you 2 approaches for beginners yoga. The first approach is to have the fundamental poses from all categories of yoga poses. I'm going to say that again. The first approach is to have the fundamental yoga poses from all categories of poses. These categories are standing poses, backward bends, twisting poses, seated poses, inversions, and balances. You should be aiming to introduce the most basic ones from each category in a well thought out sequence that progresses week on week. Okay. For example, your sequence should contain at least a few standing asanas that are beginner friendly, at least one balance pose, a few spinal extensions or backward bends that are again suitable for the beginner. There should be some amount of strength work component because we always work on mobility and flexibility. There should be a seated pose, if not more. There should be some supine poses for deep release, and there should be a rest component in the form of shavasana. Okay. Now, give or take based on your audience, this will change a bit. But if you are teaching general population, this will absolutely work. I would also like to go off track for a moment if you would indulge me. Many yoga teachers try to specialize too soon and they try to do it from the start. This is a big red flag in yoga study. Okay. When you niche down too quickly, it can actually worsen your yoga journey in the long term because yoga is meant to be done, learned, lived in a certain sequential order. There is a lived teaching methodology which many yoga teachers in the modern yoga landscape just ignore and cherry pick what they have liked or would like to sell to an audience. Okay, because the popularity index is so prevalent. So when you're an asana teacher, sharpen your skills and sharpen this in general population classes. I mean, you do it in other streams of education, right? A doctor doesn't specialize from day one. And even other areas, you do a general scope of study and then you specialize. So you may love philosophy and that may really be something that you resonate with. But you may not be ready or capable yet of teaching philosophy, and probably or mostly your student is not ready to learn it as well. So you have to separate yourself from the student and teach what the student needs versus what you like to teach or what you like to learn. Okay. And most beginners will need to start with asana. And I'd argue that there's a tremendous need for high quality asana teachers who can contextualize more yoga than just the poses and lay a rock solid foundation for yoga. Okay. Essentially, you never want to go too far in one direction in a beginner's asana class, where you end up neglecting many aspects of it and only teaching one particular part. In this first approach, you want to touch different parts of the body with these poses. Okay. You want to influence different parts of the body and help the student to experience physical wellness first. Okay. Before we go into deeper practices. The second approach that you can give a beginner to make the practice more relatable is to tell them about the 6 fundamental movements that we need in one day. These 6 fundamental movements are forward bending, back bending, side bending, and twisting. Okay. Side bending and twisting, because of 2 sides, they're considered as multiple, but I'd like to throw in a bonus one here, and that is balance. Okay. Again, I don't remember where I heard these fundamental movements. They're so useful though. And they're essentially, if you look at it, they are just from your category of poses. So depending on how you prefer to communicate, you can use the 6 fundamental movements and the bonus balance, one to make your classes relatable, to sequence your classes, or you pick from each component or each group of poses. Now, this overview is crucial for you and your students' long-time success and even yours. Okay, so the first sequencing principle is lay the roadmap and use these 2 approaches to lay that roadmap. The second sequencing principle is your start and end positions matter. The second sequencing principle is your start and end positions matter. Okay, you can start an asana class from a variety of different positions: standing, seated, supine, quadruped position, etc. Okay, but here's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid starting beginners off in a supine position. This makes their minds dull, their bodies passive. A lot of them cannot focus well when they're lying on their back. I have experimented with this many, many years ago. I used to, when I was gathering, figuring out how to create the best beginner yoga class that'll help them convert, I used to teach in different positions. Like I used to start class in different positions. And every session where I taught that whole series, starting people off on their spine, the number of people who re-enrolled was remarkably lower. Like I would say 70% lower than, say, having starting people in different positions. So I would always say avoid starting a beginner in a supine position if you can help it. And if you for some reason have to put them in a supine position to begin, make sure it is a very, very short duration of time, and make sure it's not the first class where they're lying on their back. The best place to start a beginner off is in a quadruped position. Okay, which is basically on all fours, on your hands and your knees, because this is they get to really feel the ground with their hands and feet and knees and legs. And essentially, it's not an unfamiliar position. It's not intimidating, and it's a really nice place to start. The next best position is to start them up in standing. Okay. I avoid seated positions for very long durations because, especially if the beginner has tight hips and is not used to sitting down, this may become challenging quickly. I do start all classes in a silent seat, but I make sure it's propped up, and I keep an eye to notice if anybody feels exceptionally challenged sitting like that. Okay. Now we've spoken about the start positions. The end positions are also significant, and they are pretty standard for every beginner. Okay. All classes will end with some form of supine asanas, and then following that up with shavasana. Okay. And every class of mine, not just beginners, every class of mine will have shavasana in it. And I make sure to contextualize shavasana for every class. And especially with the beginner, you want to keep your shavasana brief. Okay. And especially the first few classes, as it takes a little getting used to, right? People are lying flat on the floor in a room with strange people. And it's just we're not conditioned to rest like that. You are, because you already do a lot of yoga asana. But for the beginner who walks in, this can be a new experience. In your shavasana, make sure you always support the head and the back of the knees when possible. And let students keep their eyes open if they need to. Okay, slowly over time, if they want, they can close their eyes, but always give them the option of very gently keeping their eyes open. And when you can, offer variations of shavasana. Like in my 6-week beginner classes, I start them off with support of the knees in shavasana. And then I slowly start to introduce them to Supta Baddha Konasana, supine bound angle, a very simple, non-intimidating setup. Okay. And then I introduce them to a very basic fish pose on blocks, and just so slowly showing them different forms of resting. So essentially, that's your sequencing principle number 2. How you start and how you end those positions matter. And the third and final sequencing principle that I will share in this episode is probably the most significant one. And that is called know your what if moments. Okay, sequencing principle number 3 is know your what if moments. Now, this is so important because it can be applied to all your beginner classes and even beyond your beginner yoga classes. Your what if moments are essentially when your students have certain things going on in their bodies, in their practice, that you need to pay attention to. These could be something like back pain. It could be knee issues, wrist pain, wrist issues, weak wrists, sciatica, fatigue, pregnancy, hypertension, low blood pressure, and so on. And at least the conditions I have mentioned, you should be able to handle these with confidence in a beginner's class. At least I hope your yoga education has built you up to that at this point. Okay. And I call these the what if moments, and I'm doing air quotes here behind the camera or behind the microphone. And in this training, we go in depth into what about these what if moments. So that way you can cater to a wider audience, and you don't necessarily have to try to really niche down in a group class. You can offer variations, modifications, options, adaptable options, whatever you want to call it, to anyone who walks in if you know your what if moments. Okay. And these are applicable. The beauty of this is it's applicable to every yoga class you teach, every asana class you teach. And once you learn it for life. Okay. And this will make you a teacher who can handle a wide range of requirements. It'll build trust, and it'll help people come back to you for more asana and eventually more yoga. And most importantly, you start to feel more confident over time as you begin to help different people in class, right? And the more confident we feel, the better we do. And that impacts the student, and the student being successful impacts us. And it's a wonderful circle. Okay. So those are our 3 out of 9 sequencing principles. And remember, there's so much more in the training. I'm just scratching the surface here. And I would really invite you to just revisit or even relay your foundation for teaching beginners yoga, because it is so important. It's crucial that we teach people who have never done yoga before and really create impact in their lives. Okay. There is one thing to influence people with your yoga, but there is a completely different conversation about creating impact as a yoga teacher. And at least everything I do through this podcast, through social media, through my trainings and my studio is I aim to create more impact. Okay. And I'm hoping that this training will help you create more impact in your circles.
As always, thank you so much for listening. Remember, the Teaching Yoga to Beginners course is now waitlisting. Please go to the link in your podcast description to get waitlisted. I'll see you next week with a brand new episode. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.